glad you joined us. We have a great evening of great film and great music in about an hour's time. You can't hear me? Okay. Is that a little better? Great. Welcome to Wolf Trap again. The rain is supposed to pass in about an hour, so don't worry about that. In the meanwhile, it looks like you're playing on home planet, so it's kind of atmospheric. My name's Emil, conductor of the episode of Wolf Trap, and let's go around and introduce ourselves. My friend and colleague from NASA.
Bob Jacobs from NASA Headquarters Communication.
Start with the ladies down here at the end, and we'll just go down the road.
Hi, I'm Thaller. I'm an astronomer at NASA. I've worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Goddard Space Flight Center, and now headquarters.
Hi, I'm Farrell. I play Lieutenant Jonesy at DAB.
Hi, I'm David Zappone. I'm the producer for The Love of Spock, Adam Nimoy's new documentary on Spock.
Hi, I'm Michael Giacchino, and I wrote the music for the last 3 Star Trek films.
Hi, my name is Adam Nimoy. I am the director of the documentary film soon to be released in September for The Love of Spock. And I'm Dave Lavery from NASA Headquarters, and I've worked for the past 27 years on the Mars exploration program, including the 4 rovers that have successfully landed and explored the Red Planet.
So welcome everybody, thank you all for joining us. And I think we should start with Michael, since this is your evening. We're playing a miss featuring the film, but to have it played with live orchestra is such a thrill, and a thrill for us to play this great music, because a lot of times in film music, things get, can be a little covered up, especially in older films. Details of composition and orchestration and harmony. So it's really great to have our orchestra play this live. And I want to just start off just asking you a question that I'm wondering about. There's such great music throughout the film. And it tells the story, it propels the story, it anticipates things in the story. Is there one section in the film that you feel tells the story in the most profound way, or in a special way, that you're proud about?
I always like the scene where Kirk goes into the warp core to do, the only guy that can go in is going to be Kirk. And it's a huge sacrifice, and I tend to love moments where I get to be emotional with the music and play against what's happening. We're in the middle of this giant action scene, really, at that point. And to have a chance to play against that, for me, is always my favorite thing, because I always look at a scene like that and I try and imagine what is going on in his head. He's not thinking about action. He's thinking about, I could die doing this, and so scenes like that I really like.
And I could die holding this microphone in a rainstorm. Very excited. But I want you to notice, I'm so glad you mentioned it, that's my favorite moment too. And it's amazing how composers can use their craft of melody and harmony and pacing to grab your heart and make you cry. And that is the heart of the whole film. There's a lot of dark colors and dark harmonies, minor key harmonies. You'll notice when Kirk starts kicking the warp core to get it back into alignment to save the ship, suddenly, in a rare moment, has a major chord. And that, for some reason, it could be minor because he's about to die, but the major chord is what makes you cry. It's just so poignant. So thank you for that. How much time did you have to actually score this film?
Usually, I have about 8 weeks to write a film like this, which it's crazy. It doesn't sound like a lot of time, and it isn't a lot of time. I would love to have 12, 13, 14 weeks, but it usually averages out to about 8. And actually, being able to do these shows live has been such a gift and such a wonderful thing to be able to share with fans and audience members and getting people into symphony halls. In fact, I don't know, was anyone by chance at Comic-Con last weekend? Right on, all right. We actually premiered Star Trek Beyond at Comic-Con with the San Diego Symphony live. It was the first time that it had ever been done for a premiere. No one has ever done that before. And we had an outdoor IMAX screen, which was also the first time we had that as well. So it was just a lot of fun. And to see everyone's reaction, to see that sort of back and forth between the orchestra and the audience, that is my favorite thing ever. And that's why I love coming to these events.
Well, so great to have you back with us. You were back last year for Star Trek 2009. And that's a terrific time with that. So where do you go, I think, on this side for a moment?
Yeah, it's kind of a question that I'll start with Terry, but it's very related with Adam as well. And that is, for you, Terry, it's, what was it like to step in the middle of this cultural phenomenon? You know, when the opportunity for DS9, and to save time for the question, for Adam, very similarly, after Terry finishes, you grew up in it. So very curious what it was like to be in the center of this hurricane. But let's start with you, because by that time, Star Trek in various forms had already been established. What kind of weight did that create for you when you were offered this chance?
Wow, I like that you said offered. I had to fight for the part, but I like your version better. I started as a fan of the original series, and I think it was just in reruns. I don't remember if I was 5 or 6 when all of that happened. And we used to play Star Trek in the elementary school. And I would pretend that I was the alien with like the cool green hair or whatever, you know what I mean? It was sexy, totally inappropriate for 6. But that was, you know, the 60s. That was part of it. And then I won tickets. I was just telling Adam to see his dad in a play in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And so I was a big fan, and I loved Spock, and I too felt out of place. I was tall and gawky, and I didn't fit in. So when I had to read for it, I was really, really nervous. And I spent the summer trying to get the audition, but they wouldn't see me for it. So by the time August rolled around, and they'd already been filming for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, and they didn't have the character of science officer, Dax, then they let me come in for an audition. And I was never so nervous. Marina helped me. I had some crazy wigs. She said, oh, the producers like big boobs and big hair. So I got this crazy outfit. It looked like I came out of a Madonna wardrobe, like a girdle, and I tried to make myself as large as I could, and I teased my hair out, put tons of eye makeup on. I felt completely ridiculous. And one woman at the audition didn't show up. So we're having this test. I'm with, like, 4 of us were there, and the 5th person didn't show up, so they were going to do another test for this one person. And, you know, once you read, you don't, legally they can't have you read again. But I said, I really want it, so I want to read again. No, Terry, you're fine. They're fine with you. I'm like, no, she's not getting it. This is my part. So I went back and I read for it, and I went down to stage 16, which is Planet Health for the Next Generation, and I went to see my friends Marina and Michael and Jonathan, Grace, Sturgis, and Dorn. And right when I got to the stage door, they said, oh my goodness, you have to go back. Rick Berman wants to see you. Oh my goodness. I'm thinking, I can't do this one more time. I've already forgotten all the words. I get there, and Junie Lavery and Michael Piller and Rick Berman are sitting there, and they said, well, you got it. And I was a mess. I had black tears, the whole 9 yards. So I didn't see Michael, Jonathan, and Marina, so they met me at Michael Westmore's place at Paramount, and he had to do a mold of my face. But they came in, and we were, especially Marina, she was a mess. So she's tall, I can't believe you got it. It was just so fantastic, but how did it feel? Totally out of body. I felt like this can't be real. It was so great, but when we did it every year, it felt like, are we going to get picked up? So looking back on it, it looks like it was all success. But when you're doing it, you have this fear that it's not going to work out. And the exciting part is now Now, so much time has gone by, and yet I get to be part of the Star Trek family, and that never goes away, and it feels really cool, like we're part of some fraternity, sorority. We're a part of a club that we all from NASA to the actors on the show, to the music, to the producers. It's like we all have this cool thing in common where we feel at home with each other, and with all of you.
Adam, you were... When did you have the realization that your father was Spock? Did were you free and he did this? What happened?
Well, the first thing that happened was when I was 8 years old, my dad came home with some Polaroid pictures of the first costume tests and makeup wardrobe tests for Spock on these Polaroids, and he brought them home. There was front and back Spock, and I just thought this is going to be the greatest thing I've ever seen. You know, because I was 8 at the time, and I was a TV junkie. I was watching all the Outer Limits and Lost in Space and Twilight Zone. I just loved TV. I didn't do any homework. I didn't practice any clarinet. I just watched TV. So I was ready for it. You know, it was kind of part of the demographic of what they were appealing to. So right away, it really hit me. I mean, I can remember very vividly this moment when Dad came home with these Polaroids. But the fact is that they started shooting the regular season, the first season of Star Trek, in May and June of 1966. I turned 10 that summer. I was out of school. I had nothing to do, and I was on the set quite a bit, hanging out, and I just loved it. It was like being a kid. It was like being in Disneyland. It was just crazy. All the sets, the standing sets they had, and all the gadgets on the Enterprise. I just loved the whole experience. I got these promo pictures of Dad and Bill, which I had them sign to me. You know, I mean, it's like a fan before you went on the air. And that's why I submit I am the first Trekker or Trekkie, as it were. Thank you. And I got this promo picture of Spock, and I went back to Dad and had him sign that to me as well. And in very Spock fashion, he said to me, "That's enough." So it was just, it was a wild experience. And then shortly after the show started airing, we had this mishap, and I talk about this a lot in my documentary, For the Love of Spock, in which 16 Magazine, which was a very popular fanzine in LA, across the nation really at the time, published our home address accidentally, so they claimed, our home address is the mailing address for the fan mail. So we realized this is probably the beginning of '67, and we found out real quick how popular Spock was, because the mailman stopped coming. We had sacks of mail coming in a mail truck every week, and we were answering this stuff. This was our family activity, by the way, answering Spock fan mail. And so it was like a circus. It was a crazy ride, and we were all very excited about it. And it's still exciting to me because it's still resonating. It resonates with the people at JPL and at all the NASA headquarters. It sparked so much with the space program. It resonates with people across the country, all over the world. I mean, the most fun for me experiences I have with my dad is when people recognize him. I was in Boston with him a few years ago making a little documentary about his life in Boston, and we took a duck tour, you know? And these trams that go in the water in the Charles River and then drive around town and everything. And Dad's in his baseball cap and his sunglasses, and we're at the back of the bus. No one recognizes him. And the guy, the tour guide is talking about all the famous men of Boston. It's like Paul Revere and John Adams and John Hancock and John Kennedy. And when we passed the West End, and he says, and of course the West End's most famous resident, Leonard Nimoy of Star Trek. And the bus explodes, with applause. And my dad and I are just exchanging this look, and it's so wonderful, it's so precious, it's so heartwarming. And when we got off the bus, we were the last to get off, my dad took off his hat and glasses and introduced himself to the bus driver, who almost had a heart attack.
Touched on something that I'd like both Dave and Michelle. We'll start with Michelle, and Dave, if you pick up on that. And it's kind of talking about, for me, it's a chicken-egg issue. Is it the science fiction that impacts the people who do the real science and the astronomy and develop the rovers, but at the same time, it's the Hollywood writers and the producers and the directors who play off of the reality of the missions that you create? And just talk a little bit about that kind of influence on you.
Well, absolutely. So I grew up with Star Trek already an intact cultural phenomenon. You know, I was born right at the end of 1969. And so I grew up in a world where this imagination of what the future was like and this vision was just part of the atmosphere. It was everywhere. And you know, the images of women as being respected in equal parts of the crew, the image of the imagination of science. I mean, I've actually, one of the reasons I have my smartphone up here is that I'd like to keep track of how many exoplanets we've discovered. And it changes every day, although those are planets around other stars. So as of today, it's 3,371 planets, and those are in 2,508 different solar systems. And we only could actually detect planets around other stars starting in the mid-1990s. The technology wasn't there. But there's a wonderful expression, I forget who said this, but nobody ever invents something that hasn't been imagined first. And the idea of what's out there, of course there are planets around other stars. Of course there's life on those planets. We haven't found life yet. But growing up in an environment of science fiction and of imagination, everything just felt very normal to go into a career at NASA. That's what people do. So I think that the chicken and the egg thing were all wrapped up in one thing for me, Bob, absolutely. And not only that, but the idea of the Vulcan philosophy of infinite diversity in infinite combination. The vision of a world where people get along. I mean, yes, there are conflicts, but this incredible diversity of peoples from many planets that come together and form the Federation or whatever. Once again, you know, you don't ever invent something you don't imagine first, and it's not just the technology of Star Trek. It's the view of what we can do working together and embracing the diversity of the universe that I think had a huge impact on me as well.
Well, for you, in many ways, you're responsible for turning the fiction into reality. You have to deal with real physics and real consequences of gravity and power. Talk a little bit about the influences of science fiction on your work and how that's being applied now as part of our ongoing journey to Mars.
Well, I think that, you know, one of the things as I was growing up, and I'm literally years older than Michelle, that the environment in which I grew up was one where my heroes as a kid were John Glenn, Chuck Yeager, and Neil Armstrong. That was who I wanted to be. And everybody that I grew up with at the time, all the kids in my neighborhood, we were all the same. That was our set of career choices right in front of us. You know, those three guys. And everything that we were receiving culturally, as for example the original series was on, helped to reinforce the idea that not only was this a cool thing to do, but it was absolutely achievable. And the fact that we could look at real human beings who were just beginning to reach out and have a presence in space at the time, but at the same time I could sit down and again, being a kid of TV, I could sit down and watch, here's where that leads to. Here's what happens as a part of that process if we keep going down that road as a species. Couldn't fail to excite you, get you inspired, and get your juices flowing about the potential to be a part of that and find a way to have your entire career follow that pathway. And that's exactly what has happened. And at the same time, we certainly have drawn from a lot of the things that have been shown on all the different versions of Trek over the years, and looking at that as inspirations for some of the technologies that we've gone through and developed and actually are flying. And that's, again, is sort of a recurring theme where a lot of things that were thought exercises in the original series because they had to fill a hole in a plot, we are able to take and look at and say, you know, that's a really cool piece of imagination, but wouldn't it be even cooler if we can turn it into reality? And that's the business that we're in. We get to do that. I'll also say just one thing in addition to the technologies that we fly and the fact that, you know, for example, Juno, if you've been following the Juno mission, tomorrow at 3:41 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be at the apogee, which is the highest point in its first orbit around Jupiter since being captured by the planet. And we're watching these sort of things happen, and the reason that I'm able to map back into understanding how planetary orbits work go all the way back to the show and some really basic, simple concepts I got to learn out of the show as a kid, and that becomes real, and we pull all that into our business. The last thing I'll just mention as well is my very favorite episode from the original series happened to be the one episode called A Piece of the Action, which you've heard of. Okay, so some of you remember that one. And the reason, or one of many reasons I happen to really love that episode is I got so enthralled by the idea of Royal Fizbin that I had to find a way to play the game. It doesn't actually exist, but that didn't stop me anyway, and I'm still convinced to this day that my pursuit of understanding Royal Fizbin has affected my ability to be a poker player today.
So we're at not Star Trek headquarters, NASA headquarters, which is kind of the same thing. And we're together, we're with Bob, and we're on the phone talking to scientists, and all anybody wanted to talk about was Star Trek, and which I thought was great. You used to get the scripts when you were a kid watching the series, and you'd get them through the mail. I don't know if anybody was here in 2006. Adam, I'm not sure if your dad ever mentioned, but we had a collaboration with Leonard Nimoy and NASA, our first of 11 full collaborations over the years, and a performance of the planets, just called Pulse the Planets, with images by NASA and a script especially written for your dad. And the orchestra, of course, is enamored. I was, I don't know, starstruck, because I've been such a fan of the show since it was first on. But being in the classical music business, you go on stage and you get, excited applause, then you get sort of what you call classical music applause. And, which is good, you're happy for the applause, and gloved hands, or, quiet. Well, we walk on stage, and the orchestra's used to it too, you don't want to startle them too much. And so I walk out to the second half of the concert with your dad. We ended the first half of the concert with the end of The Wrath of Khan, and he actually narrated, if you remember the famous monologue at the end of the film, when the sarcophagus is going to Genesis planet, and I reminded him, because I watched the film like once a week. So I said, would you mind reading the famous monologue that goes, because we're going to play the end title. He goes, how does it go? So we're in my dressing room, and he pulls out a piece of paper and he gets a pen, it's space, the final frontispiece. I said, come on, sit down to the stage. He wrote it down and read it from off stage. The audience already heard this famous man's voice. He walks on stage and he does this, and it was like a rock concert. The orchestra was shocked. You don't hear things like that. But it was such a thrill, and we're showing a preview of the documentary that you and David Zappone made right before the film on the screen. So you want to see it. David Zappone is the producer for The Love of Spock, and you've worked with William Shatner. You've worked with Adam, of course. How did this come about? Your involvement and Adam's involvement.
Well, it's actually through my involvement with William Shatner. Leonard and I met 5-6 years ago through. I was doing a documentary called The Captains, and thank you. And Leonard wasn't in that, and hadn't heard from him. Then I got an email out of the blue, sir, perhaps a lunch would be useful going forward. So this is Leonard Nimoy. I couldn't believe it. And he basically told me about the idea that Adam had, and what struck me was that he was so aware of the business side of it, but probably the most telling thing about Leonard's personality was he actually said to me, do you think anybody would care about a documentary about Spock? And I said, Mr. Nimoy, yes, I think they would. He was just a wonderful guy, and unfortunately he passed away, and we moved forward. And as some of you might know, we went to Kickstarter, crowdfunding for our film, and we were the most successful documentary in crowdfunding history. So, and it's all. it's all a testament to Leonard, and the last thing I'll say is that for a character that ostensibly had no emotion, he just engenders such feeling and love. I've just never seen anything like it, so.
I just want to say that it was Dad who said we should go with Dave Zappone because of his involvement with Bill Shatner and all these Star Trek projects. And Dave has just been a tremendous supporter and a great help throughout the whole production and post-production process. But I do have to add that Dave knows everything you need to know about the original series. I mean, we could be in the editing room and I would say to Dave, which is the episode where Spock has the mind meld with the computer? And he would say, oh, that's second season, episode 4, 20 minutes into the film. So Dave, you knew so much that we needed to know, and he knows an incredible amount of material about the original series that you simply do not need to know.
I'll give you one more thing. We have a mosaic in the film of people doing this, all of the fans, and one of the shots is me at 8 years old doing this. Yeah. So if you look close, you might recognize it.
Something struck me as I was listening to rehearsal, and music for most of us is it's a memory jogger, it's a personal thing, and parts of the score take us to specific moments of the film for us, especially me. I'm wondering for the composer, does it do that for you when you get to sit back and listen to it, or are you thinking about the trombone player who was giving you a hard time? What is that like?
I have a really good trombone player. He's great. He never gives me a hard time. I am literally. It's hard sometimes because it's in some ways like what an actor has to do. They have to embody the emotions and the mindset of the character they're playing, and I'm constantly doing that all day long when I'm writing because I want to get into the minds of the characters. So I could go through it like working on a film like Inside Out, which I don't know if anyone saw Inside Out. It's a really emotional film, and there are moments in Trek which go the same way, and it's exhausting because by the end of the day, you feel like all you've been doing is like crying or being upset or angry, whatever it is. It's like you go through these roller coaster of emotions throughout the day, and it's really, really, really hard. But that's the only way I know how to write music is to have to feel something. If I'm working on a film where I don't feel anything, it's very difficult for me to write. And actually, one quick story about your father, really quickly. We were recording the first Star Trek film. We were in the thick of it. I was at the board. We were listening. The orchestra's playing. One of the producers taps me on the shoulder and said, Michael, somebody here, they want to talk to you. And I was like, I'm kind of in the middle of something right now. Can we do this later? And he goes, no, I think you're going to want to say hi to this person. And he goes, just turn around. So I turn around, and Leonard Nimoy standing behind me. And I was like, I almost had a heart attack. I was right there. I literally said, I told the orchestra, everyone stop. And I said, would you come out into the room with me? We had 100 people in the orchestra. He walks out into the room with me, and literally the gasp that I heard from the orchestra, and they all just like got up and they started clapping, and he got up on the podium, and he did this, and everyone almost fainted. And he was so sweet, and he hung out with us for the entire day. We had lunch together. We sat around this table just eating and talking, and I was asking about his photography. He's an amazing photographer. And it was just one of those times where you go, I am so lucky to be able to hang out for a bit with this person who inspired me so much as a kid. And what a beautiful person he was.
Absolutely. By the way, my apologies for those of you in the back who won't be able to see this, but would you mind showing them your socks?
You can go to Bob's Facebook page in about 20 minutes. Just before we have some question and answer, I just wanted to ask you another question. There are two moments I think that just to have the heads up, and I think it's seldomly heard, but there's a moment in the beginning of the film where you see a couple who has a very ill daughter who's about to die, and at that moment you have very simple music, but it makes it that much more poignant. It's just a solo piano. There, and when Spock runs to see Kirk because he knows that there are no miracles, that there's something happening. And again, use a piano. And Is that something that you've done often before? How did that just strike you?
For me, if you're with a friend, and that friend has been going through a rough time, whatever it is, and you're sitting with them, they say, and you ask them, how are you doing? How are you doing? And you're not going to sit there and go, how are you doing? Are you okay? That must have been really hard. You know, and sometimes music does that. Some people will play a scene, very loud, emotional, big music, 100 strings, and for me, I want to feel like someone is gently talking to me, someone is trying to understand what I'm going through. So musically, I tend to, in those big emotional moments, sometimes get really, really quiet, really small, and I feel like you listen better that way. It's just,
It's tremendously powerful. We have about 4 minutes before the roof collapses. If anybody want to shout out a question, we'll see if we can get an answer. Let's see. I'll do my best to go for Winfrey. Let's see. Who has a question out here? Who wants to be electrocuted? Another person.
I'm not going to electrocute. I have a question for Mr. Giacchino. What was your mindset going into Star Trek Into Darkness, setting it apart from the previous Star Trek that you worked on, and where did you go from on to beyond as well?
Well, these Star Trek films are the first time I've ever been able to do 3 of something, you know, and I've always wanted to be able to do 3, to be able to tell a story, and the great thing about doing that is you can build upon the themes from the last film. You can use those themes, but you can build on it, you can do more, because you're always introduced to new characters. In Into Darkness, of course, we have Benedict Cumberbatch, and in the new film, we have a couple of great characters. If you saw it, Jayla is a wonderful character. So it's all about building on that world, so it never turns into something completely different, but it's just about new discoveries in the music.
Great. Anybody has a... Yes, sir. You have a question there, perhaps maybe 2 more.
And thank you. This question is actually for the scientists. We've seen from the original series things like communicators and computers on desktops, that sort of thing, cell phones. Will we ever see things like shape-shifting or transporters?
Did you take that first, or you want me to do that?
I'll give it a shot. So the short answer is yes. Very slightly longer answer is, before I started, I've been working with Mars exploration for about 27 years now. Before that, I spent about 12 years working in some of the advanced technology programs that enabled Mars exploration. And one of the guys I was working with that long ago was already working on the basic fundamental principles of physics behind warp drive. So, you know, everything associated with the advanced technologies that you used to see in the show. Again, well, I'll like it this way. Last year, I was very fortunate. I also got to work as a technical consultant on the movie The Martian. And one of the things that made working on that movie such a pleasure is Andy Weir, who wrote the book that turned in the script, had done such a wonderful job of doing his homework and getting the science right. And as we went through to be technical consultants, there was very little to nitpick because it was all valid stuff. The original Trek series and all the ones after that followed in the same vein. They did their homework. They got the science right to begin with. There's not a whole lot of magic that happens. There is a whole lot of physics that happens. And so those core technologies you see, you know, the cell phone is such a wonderful example of it. You know, this is the communicator that we all saw 50 years ago. But the other stuff that was shown in the show, all that stuff is based in reality and the real laws of physics, and all that is stuff that we are indeed trying to work on.
And one thing I'll add to that, so I mean, we're actually getting quite good at teleportation right now. And you may have heard of something called quantum entanglement and quantum teleportation. So we're only doing this now at the atomic level or even small molecules, but we can actually teleport things a distance of about 100 kilometers, and I mean real teleportation. Something stops existing in one place and starts existing in another place. If you're curious about that, there's a book called The Physics of Star Trek. It's written by a guy named Lawrence Krauss that I do some work with on the Discovery Channel. And I'm not getting any kickbacks, by the way, because he's totally honest. But it's a very good primer about modern physics and how it stands today, and where the warp drive and the teleporter really are in development.
Well, we have one last question. You may have your other question for our final question.
I have a question for Mr. Giacchino. When you're scoring a film, how do you go about determining the instrumentation for your orchestra? Because I noticed that like scores like Star Trek and then, for instance, Inside Out have not completely, but different instrumentation. So I just wonder how you go about doing them.
You know, writing a film score is a lot like, my grandfather was a tailor, so he would make suits for people, all right? And the suits would fit that person perfectly. And I think about what I do is so much like what he did. I'm literally creating a suit for a story. You know, a suit made of music, and it should only fit that story. I want the music from Inside Out never to be able to work in Star Trek. You know, that would be bad. In my, you know, I want them to be individual, and I want when you listen to them to feel like, oh, that's Star Trek. I remember that, and you can relive it in your head. When I was a kid, the only way to go and relive a movie experience was by bringing a tape recorder into the theater and recording it, and then going home and listening to it night after night after night after night. That's what I did. And I loved listening to how that sounded. Soundtracks was the same thing. The only way I could relive a movie was listening to its soundtrack. So,
Great. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, panelists.